How do you prepare your flight department for a possible recession? The answer might surprise you. From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan. I'm Pete Combs with your trusted source for business aviation news. How do you recession-proof your flight department? You know, it is a big question in these days of economic uncertainty. Some economists say we are headed for a recession. Others say we're headed for continued economic growth. Perhaps it might be best to prepare for both. That's the driving thought behind a recent industry article by entrepreneur and aviator Anthony Tivnan, who's the president of Magellan Jets. We're also talking with Michael Diamond at Nexa Capital Partners, where he's the managing partner. Michael comes to us from McLean, Virginia, and from restaurant equipment world, one of the most well-traveled executives we know, company president Brad Pierce, who's in Orlando, Florida. So let's begin with Anthony. If you would, please brief us on the article you wrote regarding sustaining your organization in times of both prosperity and general economic downturn.
So the piece was actually the brainchild of an exercise that myself and some other entrepreneurs from a group that I'm involved with, we started, really looking at our businesses, our personal lives, and in the wake of a economic turn, and this was back in Q3 of 2018, where we started the exercise, how would that look to our businesses? How would that look to our personal lives? And how would we maintain some of the successes and some of the things that we enjoy in our both business and personal lives? How would that impact that? Or how would we take advantage of certain opportunities that were the result of that? And as I went through the exercise, I really started to look at not just my own business, but also some of the customers that we help in terms of managing their aviation portfolios. Certainly, I would say in the last 18 to 36 months, we've seen a really large uptick in the amount of activity where diversification is certainly becoming the norm in terms of private aviation, where customers aren't just relying on their own aircraft, or aren't just relying on their own fraction, or just relying on charter. They really are becoming a lot more savvy in understanding that having that diversified approach can certainly create more value and less risk to what they're doing. So that was where I developed the story and just started to really think about, the customer, the flight departments, and take the research that I had done and internalized into my own business, and thought about, how can I help provide some information on this research and talk about it in light of, your own aviation portfolio.
Michael Diamond at Nexa Associates, you did a number of studies during the last economic downturn about how flight departments can help their corporations overcome some of the disadvantages that come with that downturn. I'm really interested to know what you found in that juncture and how it applies today.
Yes, we completed our initial study of this in 2012, where companies were beginning to recover from the great downturn, the Great Recession, as it's called. In keeping with the methodologies that we've developed over the years with NBAA, we examined the performance of the S&P 500. These are the 500 largest publicly traded companies in the United States. And since they all have publicly available financial information and a lot of disclosure, we could see what was going on with respect to the flight department. So our basic conclusion, after looking at the categories of financial performance of these companies, and also knowing which of these companies may have shut down their flight department and which others might have expanded their flight departments during those tough years, we found that the users very consistently outperformed those who sort of got out of the flight department business across almost every category of the economy.
Also with us, we have a real-world example of that in Brad Pierce. Hey, Brad is a single pilot operator who uses your own aircraft to support your business. You might think you'd have been among the first operators to stop flying when faced with the economic downturn of a decade ago. And yet, I know for a fact you did pretty much the exact opposite. So please tell us how you decided to use your aircraft more and what you discovered. What advantages that gave you in relation to your competition?
Sure, absolutely. Well, actually, I did follow the crowd. As soon as the last recession hit, I immediately cut back on aircraft usage, literally 95% less of what we were utilizing the aircraft for. And that went on, honestly, that was probably only lasted about a month. And I realized that all of my competitors were doing the exact same thing that I was. Nobody was going out and seeing people, nobody was engaging customers, and I decided to flip the script and go in a completely different direction and actually accelerate my usage far before what I was using it even before the recession. And my theory was that the overall size of the pie in terms of available business was certainly smaller, but if I could get there in front of people and build relationships with them, I could get a bigger percentage of that pie, which would be a net gain for our company. Started engaging this, started flying face to face with customer time and time again, and it was almost funny the reaction of customers that they would go, "Oh yeah, nobody comes and sees us. You're the only guy that's been here in the past 6 months or the past year or you name the time period." And customers were actually welcoming it. It was easier to get appointments since none of my competitors were going out. I could get appointments with anybody. It was literally like just completely wide open. So the more that I flew, the more that our business revenue increased, and it caught on like wildfire. It turned out to be the absolute best strategy. It's sometimes when you spend money, when you're looking at the economic outlook not being real rosy ahead, it can be viewed almost as not being very prudent with dollars. Yet I think that was quickly dispelled, even here internally. I am a family owned business, but that just means that I have the most critical board of directors in the world, which are all family members who I need to see at birthday parties too. So, needless to say, they were not on board to begin with as we started going about spending this money. And really, I use the term spending money, but it was investing. It was an investment, and it was a gamble of sorts, an educated guess that this was going to be a good strategy moving forward. Turned out to be phenomenal for us. It turned out we literally had record growth to the point that literally the end of 2009, I ended up buying another brand new airplane simply because we had done so well during the year. When I fast forward to our current economic time right now, I would argue that my industry right now, we build restaurants and food service operations, which we typically see recessionary activity before other markets. Going out to eat is one of the easiest, kind of lowest friction things that you can just cut out of your daily budget. And when I look back at my industry for the past 15 years, aside from during the last recession, we have always had growth of 5 to 6% per quarter. We're now literally at 1.6%, 1.8%. We're teeny tiny growth. Our industry is hurting right now. And my competitors have already started doing the same thing where they're kind of backing off on their travel and their things of that nature. And my usage this year has increased to the point I'll probably fly in excess of 800 hours this year, and can tell you that we are up strong double digits in terms of company growth. And I attribute that completely to use of the aircraft and continuing my strategy that when times are getting leaner, that's when we go out there and capture a larger percentage of the market share.
Really, Brad, you're talking about one of the main benefits of business aviation, which puts us face to face with our clients and our peers in a way that we can actually have a conversation as opposed to maybe doing it remotely. Anthony, tell me a little bit about how this applies to other flight departments. If they're seeing similar downturns to what Brad was talking about in his line of work back in the Great Recession, how might they better optimize, in your opinion, their own flight departments and use of business aviation without foregoing the use of their aircraft?
Sure. So to me, it's not a matter of cutting costs. We look at it as more of a cost control exercise, making sure that we're relooking at what is the ROI impact of the activities that we're doing, certainly looking at our customers. And we always want to plan for worst case scenario. So if we lost our top 10 or top 15 customers, how would we replace them? So that might breed the conversation of, diversifying your customer base, going out and looking at new customers that you may not have. And I think a perfect example of that is being present when others are not. That creates a huge opportunity for that diversification. Really just looking at the efficiencies of the activities that we're doing in terms of what we're using the aircraft for, and again, what is that return on investment look like? So it's really easy to sit there and just say we can cut this, we can cut this, we can cut this. But what a lot of folks aren't really paying attention to when they're involved in that activity is the result and the ROI impact that has to your business when you're cutting, 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 cutting. That likely is going to result in lost revenue. So it's really more of a controlled cost exercise as opposed to just cut everything. So it's how can we do things more efficiently? How can we utilize the aircraft more efficiently? Are there high risk customers that we're not in front of right now? We call them at risk customers, where they may have experienced deviations, or they may experience some poor service. Well, those are certainly the ones where you may want to get on the road and make sure that you're showing them the attention before you're going out to see a new prospect. So it's really just about looking at things differently, and certainly making sure that your highest value accounts and your at-risk accounts are certainly happy. They're front and center with you, because we all know it's a lot more expensive to chase the prospect and look to convert while that activity still needs to remain, but making sure that you have a really tight grip and a really strong hold on your existing customer base.
Michael, in the time since the Great Recession, and since your own company performed that study we mentioned earlier, do you think our industry has gained a greater appreciation or perhaps realization that even when times are a little tighter, you still need to use business aviation in order to service your clients and to meet with them face to face?
Yeah, absolutely. So the results that we developed in our study of the Great Recession really did confirm, not just through data, but also anecdotally from interviews we conducted with many companies, that companies using business aviation mitigated revenue losses when the economy dipped, and they also recovered more quickly than those who either parked their jets or shut down their flight department. And we were able to analyze the details, through financial data. It was a bit sort of a big data analysis. And I'll give you one example, which you all will remember. In 2009, when the automotive industry was really struggling in Detroit, and Congress invited the CEOs of the major companies to come to Washington for hearings, because these companies were asking for federal support to navigate through the recession. Those companies, after the criticism they received for getting to Washington on their aircraft, ultimately, or shortly thereafter, shut down their flight departments or shrank them dramatically. And we found that the foreign automakers who were not part of that scrutiny, who continued to access dealer networks in the United States using their corporate aircraft, were able to take market share away from the Detroit manufacturers, primarily by renegotiating dealer relationships. And so, the effect of business aviation, being able to get around to even smaller communities and have face-to-face meetings with dealers, had a huge impact on the performance of the non-US based automotive manufacturers. So there's other data that really underscores the fact that revenue, your top line revenue is vulnerable if you're not out there facing your customers every day. And it's a fool's promise to remove one of the best tools to be able to do that by parking your jet, or basically losing a mobility tool, an option that is critical to maintaining revenue and to grow revenue.
Brad, having been through all of this yourself and learning what you did with the last recession, as far as continuing the use of your aircraft, is there anything that you perhaps are looking at a little differently now? I mean, should this current indication of a downturn become another recession as far as how you plan to use your aircraft to support your business?
Well, I think that it's prudent that when I say that we go out there and use our aircraft during the downturn, um, that it's prudent we look at things like the ROI on which trips to do, which customers are the most valuable customers or the highest long-term value potential for customers. I think that we're going to go full guns. It's when we perform really, really well. Again, because we get out there. Everybody else sits on their hands and just doesn't have any type of movement. And we get out there and when my airplane touches that runway, when we touch down, the cash register rings. It happens time and time again. I look at those folks that park their airplanes, and that's to me equivalent of firing your best employee. We look at our staff and we look at our talent that's here on board and how many people it would take that I would need to have employed just to do what I do or that my senior management folks do. And literally, we would need to add 3 or 4 more staff members for every one of us. And all of a sudden, you look at it, and my best, most efficient staff member on the team, you could say, is actually the airplane. And I have amazing people work for me, but this is what connects myself and my people here to our end user customers. And I firmly believe that being there in front of them, looking somebody in the eye, giving firm handshakes, committing to doing an amazing job for them, that all means something. I think in this day and age, especially of text messages and FaceTime and all these communication tools, which we use certainly internally and for high efficiency, I think that all those things are fantastic. I encourage all of my competitors to use those solely and not to go out and see anybody. When it comes to us, though, I still believe that people do business with people that they have relationships with, and you can't form a relationship over a text message.
Anthony?
I think we're touching on some really great points here. And, if I had to look at some of the things that we looked at in our own business in terms of, recession proofing our business strategy, it certainly starts with right people on the bus. And those, our people, our colleagues, they're our most having the right people in the right seats. They're the highest, productivity and efficiency that we're going to get. And by taking care of our colleagues, they'll take care of our customers, and really treating our colleagues like our customers. And the nice thing about this exercise is a lot of the points that we're discussing today are really things that smart business should be, you should be looking at, on a semi-annually basis, on a quarterly basis, because what they're doing is just creating a lot of good efficiencies and good business. No matter if we're in an economic turn or we're in a economy boom, the result is always a positive effect. So that's, the right people on the bus, cost control, diversifying your client base, and certainly capitalizing on your current customers. And then the last piece, which was already mentioned from a FaceTime perspective, but it's just the marketing and being front and center. As we've talked about on here a couple of times, a lot of companies are cut, and not really looking, 5 steps ahead at what the impact to future revenues is going to do when you're cutting like that, and then having to go out and find new customers because you weren't front and center. So really just not being invisible to your customers and your prospects in this time. And there's certainly ways to do that. Face-to-face meetings is certainly one. Then there's other marketing strategies that can also keep you front and center. And again, from a cost control perspective, not a cutting perspective. We don't cut marketing in time when we're in an economic downturn. We actually increase that marketing spend. Our messaging may change in terms of different markets and what we think is of interest. But to the overall point, I think everybody's kind of touched on. It's certainly not a time to cut. It's really a time to think about efficiencies and productivity.
I'd like to build on that and point out that when companies sort of fall into slower periods, or maybe it's a recessionary slide, the CEO, the chief executive officer, is generally hired and working to increase shareholder value. That's his number one job. The CFO, on the other hand, is generally responsible for cost containment. And we've seen time and again a CFO stepping in without really the knowledge of the board or sometimes even the CEO, ordering cuts in sales and marketing and in the flight department that don't get recognized until months later. And one of the key things I would strongly suggest is that the flight departments, who are principal members of NBAA, ensure that the research and information that's been undertaken to identify the value of flight departments during a recession gets to the right level in the organization. One way of doing that is to take the white paper that we've produced for NBAA and get that into the pockets of the seat backs of the aircraft that they're flying, and also make sure that copies of this kind of research get up to the level of the board and the CEO and the CFO.
Brad, you concur?
Sure.
You know what gets me is everything I've heard in this podcast. We've talked about how we might survive an economic downturn, but really where we're going with this is how we can thrive during an economic downturn.
Really, my one little add-on, and this is more kudos than anything, simply to keep up to date with NBAA. That NBAA has done a fantastic job of having studies such as this available to folks to share with their corporate boards, whether it's a corporate board, whether it's a family board, like in my case, and some of this real world data that's out there. And I think there is no other trade organization that's out there that has such robust advocacy in terms of the value of business aviation with tools, for instance, like this podcast. And I just can't be more thankful. NBAA has been a true partner in our success in utilizing business aviation.
That's Brad Pierce, president of Restaurant Equipment World, based in Orlando. We also heard from Anthony Tivnan, president of Magellan Jets, and Michael Diamond, managing partner at Nexa Capital Partners. You can find a lot of inspiration on the topic of flying through a recession at the website noplane.nogain.org. You'll also find some of Nexa Capital's very informative work on this topic by going to nbaa.org and searching under the term recession. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. Remember, you can always subscribe to all Flight Plan podcasts at Apple's iTunes website, your favorite podcast site, or download them from nbaa.org. I'm Pete Combs. Thanks for listening to Flight Plan.